All right, let's dive right in and unpack what is shaping up to be a massive surprise in modern filmmaking. We're talking about the modern auteur himself, Christopher Nolan, adapting the 3,000-year-old epic poem, The Odyssey. Now, when you think of Nolan's filmography, you're probably picturing mind-bending sci-fi or super gritty historical dramas, right? So seeing him tackle ancient Greek mythology, it seems like a massive pivot. But as you'll see, it actually makes total sense. So it really begs the question, can Hollywood's biggest modern director actually conquer a 3,000-year-old myth? Just think about it for a second. Can Nolan's signature style, the complex characters, the intense practical effects, can that really mesh with an ancient text? I mean, for most of us, hearing The Odyssey immediately triggers flashbacks to dusty required reading in high school. We just picture these static, old marble statues and really dense, hard-to-read translations. But is that what the story actually is? Well, no. Not at all. It's fascinating how our boring textbook expectations totally clash with the gritty reality of the story. If you look closely at the core of the Odyssey, it's absolutely not some stale museum piece. It's actually this surprisingly modern, incredibly dark look at war trauma, the immense, crushing burden of leadership, and the terrifying prospect of just completely losing yourself in the aftermath of a massive conflict.
Section 1. Nolan takes on Homer, embracing the mythology.
A lot of people might assume a modern filmmaker would just strip away all the fantasy stuff to make a grounded, gritty, historical war movie. But honestly, all the evidence points to Nolan leaning heavily into the source material. He isn't stripping away the ancient gods and monsters at all. He's totally embracing the mythology. Just look at this powerhouse casting that's being reported. We've got Matt Damon stepping into the lead as Odysseus, Tom Holland appearing to play his son Telemachus, with Anne Hathaway linked to his wife Penelope, and Zendaya expected to play the goddess Athena. And this specific roster is a huge deal, including these central original characters, especially the literal goddess Athena and the son waiting back home, really proves this is going to be a surprisingly faithful adaptation. These aren't just random side characters, they are the absolute core of the mythology.
Section 2. A very modern ancient hero, the flawed protagonist.
To really grasp why Nolan is the perfect fit here, we need to completely stop viewing our main character, Odysseus, as some flawless, boring marble statue. Instead, we've got to see him for what he truly is, a highly complicated, fiercely arrogant, and exceptionally intelligent leader. He's incredibly brave, sure, but he's also incredibly impulsive. In other words, he is the ultimate Nolan-esque protagonist. Nolan absolutely loves characters who are their own worst enemies, and man, Odysseus fits that bill perfectly. To see that brilliant but arrogant mind in action, we just have to look at his famous encounter with the Cyclops. And remember, the Odyssey isn't just that one story with the Cyclops. That's literally just one chapter in a 10-year nightmare of a journey home. But when Odysseus does meet this giant, he doesn't beat him with raw physical strength. No, he outsmarts him using his incredible tactical mind. He feeds the Cyclops a fake name, telling him he's called Nobody. Which, brilliantly, leads to one of the greatest, most suspenseful punchlines in ancient history. Because when Odysseus finally attacks the giant, the Cyclops screams for help to his friends outside, yelling, "Nobody is attacking me." I mean, it's a flawless trick. But here's where that fatal flaw of arrogance kicks in. Odysseus just can't walk away with the win. His pride gets the absolute better of him, and as he's escaping, he yells back his real name. That single act of ego ruins the whole shebang. Why? Because the Cyclops happens to be the son of Poseidon, the god of the sea. By revealing his true identity, Odysseus enrages a literal god and completely dooms his journey home.
Section 3. Monsters and impossible choices. Tests of leadership.
As we move into the rest of this terrifying journey, it becomes clear that these horrific mythological obstacles aren't just there to be cool CGI action set pieces. They're actually deep, psychological tests of leadership. Every single monster forces a new terrible decision. Let's break down a couple of these. First, you have the Lotus Eaters, where the food literally causes people to just forget their homes and families entirely. Then there's the incredibly famous Sirens, creatures whose songs lure sailors to their deaths. What is so fascinating here is the incredibly modern thinking required to survive this. Odysseus doesn't just arrogantly pretend he's strong enough to resist the siren song through pure willpower. Instead, he orders his crew to tie him directly to the ship's mast. He wins because he actively understands and mitigates his own weaknesses. Honestly, that is next-level leadership. And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate burden of leadership. Later on, Odysseus has to sail his ship between Scylla, which is this giant sea monster, and Charybdis, a massive whirlpool. There is absolutely no trick to get out of this completely unscathed. He has to navigate an impossible choice where there is no good option, only a slightly less terrible one. Leadership, as this ancient story shows us, isn't always about making perfect decisions. Sometimes it's literally just about surviving impossible ones. Section 4. The original nonlinear story, a shared structure.
Okay, now we have to address the structural elephant in the room. If there's one thing audiences expect Christopher Nolan to mess with, it's the storytelling structure. The guy has a famous love for fractured timelines, flashbacks, and just playing with chronology in general. So people are probably already assuming he's going to take this straightforward ancient story and make it needlessly complicated, right? Well, here is the crucial point. While we might think of this as a straight 10-year timeline, Homer actually wrote the original text non-linearly. The original Odyssey is absolutely packed with flashbacks. Odysseus spends huge chunks of the epic just sitting around a table, retelling events that have already happened to him years prior. This means that if Nolan uses his classic, complex, fractured storytelling techniques, he's actually being perfectly faithful to the 3,000-year-old original. The source material was basically doing Nolan-esque timelines millennia before movies even existed. How cool is that?
Section 5. The journey back home, the universal core.
So let's pull all of this together. If you strip away the sea gods, if you remove the terrifying monsters, and you look completely past the fractured timelines, what are you actually left with? We have to focus on the emotional stakes that drive this entire 10-year narrative forward. And I want to pose this directly to you. Why do you think this specific story has survived for nearly 3 millennia? Like, why do we still care? Let's step back from the cinematic spectacle for a second and really look at the deep, universal human element that sits right at the core of this text.
Underneath it all, the entire epic boils down to just this: trying to get home. And I don't just mean physically sailing back to the island of Ithaca. It's about trying to return mentally and emotionally to who you were before the immense trauma of life and war permanently changed you. It is fundamentally about a man who has lost himself and is desperately trying to find his way back to his family. That is a deeply universal theme, and it resonates just as strongly today as it did thousands of years ago.
Which leaves us with this final thought. We've got one of humanity's oldest, most universally relatable stories, being retold by one of modern cinema's most ambitious directors, starring an absolutely incredible cast, and staying totally true to the deep psychological themes of the original myth. If Nolan gets this right, we aren't just looking at another summer movie. We really have to wonder, will this 3,000-year-old story become the defining epic of the decade when it hits screens on July 17th? It's incredibly exciting, and I highly recommend diving into the original text before you head to the theater. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.